Hello and welcome back to another episode of Talking with Tapolci. I'm your host, Jason Tapolci. If you caught last week's episode, we talked a lot about empowering your end users and how important that is to give them some power to save you some time in your day. And we went through a nice little tutorial, so if you haven't got a chance to watch that, I would recommend going back on our blog, blog.voipinnovations.com, and check it out. This week I want to talk about DID management and why it's so important and some of the tools that you can use to better manage your DIDs. If you're like any of the companies, VoIP companies I know, you're probably growing, and so you're going to get more and more DIDs, and it becomes problematic at a certain points unless you have the right tools in order to manage those DIDs. So let's get started. You want to, first off, we want to talk about, in this episode, we're going to talk about DID searching. Okay, so if you have thousands of DIDs, how do you search them DIDs? We want to talk about DID configuration, whether it's a new DID or it's an existing DID, how do you configure those? And then DID inventory, so your personal inventory that you have with your carrier, and reordering, inventory reordering, show you some ways to have your inventory automatically reorder in certain areas that you never want to be without DIDs. And then lastly is DID groups. And DID groups is a great way to organize all of your DIDs into a certain format or by customer to give you certain metrics like cost or revenue, total number of DIDs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and dive into my computer, and I'm going to take you on a little tour and show you some of the tricks of the trade with VoIP Innovations here and how to better manage your DIDs. So let's get to it. Okay, so here we are. We're in the VoIP Innovations back office, and I have navigated to our DID management page. And this page is it's a search tool that enables you to search thousands of DIDs in any format with any feature set through any carrier. And it's meant to make filtering these DIDs a breeze. And so let's just get started real quick. You can go and show all your DIDs, and it will list all the DIDs you have on your account, and you can see that you can select 50 numbers per page, or 20, or 10, and you can see you have multiple pages here. But what the neat thing about this is that I can go and say, I can search for a particular telephone number, or I can say, hey, I only want to see my local numbers here. Or I only want to see local numbers that are in this endpoint group, in this DID group, or as a part of this client. I can even further filter these this search by saying I want to see only numbers that have 911 associated with it, or that don't have any 911 associated with it. And as you can see, you can pick and choose whatever feature that you want to display. So we've actually taken DID search and made it extremely fast and easy, and you can slice it up any way that you want to. The next thing is going to be DID configuration. We found out that most people, when they purchase a DID, they may not be ready to configure that DID at the time of purchase, and I always equate this to my team. That's like me buying a bike for my kid, and I try to put it together at the end of the where I check out instead of waiting till I got home to assemble the bike. So what we did was we allowed our customers to go and purchase DIDs, and we allow them to configure them at a later time. If they choose to configure them at the time of purchase, that's fine. Or if you don't quite have all the information, say you don't have the correct address or 911 or CNAM information, you could have a list here that you see that says unconfigured DIDs. And it simply tells you the telephone number, the type of DID, the location, network, tier, features, and the date it was purchased. And then we have a configured DID link here. And if you simply click on that, it brings up a nice DID configuration wizard. And it starts with the caller ID, goes through 401, emergency, the miscellaneous, and then the finish. And you can simply disable or enable and enter any information that you need for any one of these types of services simply right here. You're able to go to enable 411, type in the information, I'm not going to do that here. Or 911, if you forgot to put caller ID in, you could go back and actually, enable that and put that in. You have the ability to pick, some features there for this particular number, and then when you go to finish it, assign it to a DID group and an endpoint group. This makes the whole configuration very streamlined and time efficient. So also I wanted to make the point that you can also check multiple DIDs and run the configuration on selected DIDs. And this again makes it much easier. Instead of it doing it onesie twosie, you can hammer out a bunch at one time. And then next here we want to go, and I want to show you guys real briefly the personal inventory. Now at VoIP Innovations, if you have an account with us, you're going to have active DIDs. You're going to have unconfigured DIDs, which then need to be configured. But we also allow you to have a personal inventory. This is an inventory that you can store numbers for in areas that you never want to not have numbers in. So if your sales makes a sale, you want to be able to provide that number right away. So we allow you to have your own inventory. These numbers are inactive, and you can simply activate them by clicking activate. And again, you see the basic information, the number, the link to activate them, the DID type, network, rate center, state, tier, and then what features it has and the date that it entered into your inventory. And again, you can choose multiple numbers and perform many functions. And it's worth pointing out as well that you see that we try to do a good job of putting question marks everywhere to identify what each button does. And then lastly, with your personal inventory is going to be your auto fulfillment rules. And this is really neat. This allows you to pick certain rate centers or certain areas, and you can tell our system to automatically order DIDs for a certain area if it's below a certain threshold. So for example, if I wanted to have in a certain rate center no less than 10 numbers there, because that's where I sell most of my services, then I would have this, I could set this system up to auto reorder anytime it goes below 10. And that can be an auto reorder where it automatically does that, or I can have it send my staff or me an email saying, we're going to reorder these, we've held these for you, would you like us to place the order? And so that's a very neat function. It helps streamline the DID management process, the ordering process, to give you a lot more time in your day, so it's one less thing you have to worry about. And then finally, we're going to have DID groups. Okay, and DID groups is an efficient way to manage your DIDs. You can place DIDs for a particular company into one group. And for example, I'll come into here and take a look at this. This only has one, this is a bad example, but it only has one DID in here. But you can assign DIDs to a particular group. So we would, a common way of using this is to name it a customer name, and then you put all the DIDs for that particular customer in that group. And as you can see all the kind of metrics about this particular DID group. You know, what network's it on, how many DIDs, what's the MRC and the NRC, do they have 911, fax to email, how many ridge and term minutes have they used, what was the cost on that, and so forth. And you can see this on a per DID basis, but you can also see it on a total basis as well. And this is a really, really neat way to better organize and manage your DIDs. As well as, you know, obviously you can put some notes in here. And we did this up here. This is, you could put your customer revenue that you make on that particular customer, and it will actually determine your gross profit margin for that particular group of DIDs. So again, it's a very neat way to manage and organize your DIDs. So that's briefly a little bit about how to better manage your DIDs with VoIP Innovations. We do have a wiki that has a lot of information about this, and we are always producing videos that you can watch. And next week, I plan on, if you join me back here, we plan on talking about SMS services and how that's taking the world by storm, and a product that we're putting out that's going to have SMS forwarding, which is a really, really neat product. So again, thanks for joining me this week. My name is Jason Tapolci, and this is Talking with Tapolci.